my loves, and welcome back to another episode of Soulful Wahine. I'm your host, Keholani. As you all can see, I have switched back to my original backdrop um, as I am still currently building my home studio. And what you folks saw last week was kind of like the beginning of my home studio. However, yeah, I just didn't like it and I didn't like how it was coming together. And so right now my home studio is currently still kind of under construction. So I just wanted to say thank you all for bearing with me on this journey of, creating this amazing, beautiful space for Soulful Wahine. And so I want to jump right into today's episode. You know, Today's episode is a soft, soulful reminder that you are not broken for revisiting the same emotions, triggers, or old stories. You are not back at square one, but rather you are moving through a spiral, sis. And this spiral is important because within this spiral, every loop brings us deeper clarity, deeper awareness, and self-compassion, which are very important things that we need on our healing journey. I want to go over the myth of linear healing. And for many of us, we all know that healing isn't linear. Okay, there is not a straight path from pain to peace. It's just not possible. Okay, and the brain, and especially the trauma brain, do not work like that. Okay, our brains store pain and it stores trauma in loops. And healing requires us to return to these loops with new tools. And this is why the process can feel repetitive. However, each time we circle back, we're wiser. We respond differently. And that is healing. Neuroscience shows us that the amygdala, or our brain's fear center, does not respond to logic. So you can 100% understand your trauma and still feel stuck. And why is that? Well, it's because trauma lives within our nervous system and not just in our minds or our brains. So I want us to understand the spiral, because a lot of times in the mental health world, spiraling or being in a spiral can be looked at or viewed as a very negative thing. And so I want us to understand the spiral in the sense of understanding that this is a part of the healing journey. Okay? I want you to think of healing like a spiral staircase. Okay? We're not returning to the same exact place, but rather we're circling around a familiar wound, but from a higher level of awareness. And so each time we revisit it, our response changes. The trigger might still hurt, but instead of reacting now, we pause. The sadness still comes, but when it does, we meet ourselves with compassion and not shame. And the boundary is still hard, but we set it anyways. What feels like starting over is actually growth with deeper perspective. Now, I want us to talk about the neuroscience of why our triggers resurface over time. Because there have been so many times where I have worked with clients, who have told me things such as like, oh my gosh, Keholani, it's been months. Why am I still being triggered? Or why does this still bother me? Or why does this still activate me? And so I wanted to fit a portion in here to kind of help explain the neuroscience of things, okay? And help us understand why we still might partake in certain behaviors or thoughts, even when we know better. When we're triggered, the amygdala, again, the brain's fear center, activates like we are in danger. And so then the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is responsible for logic and regulation, it temporarily goes offline. So once the amygdala is activated, logic, reasoning, that kind of goes out the window. It's a lot harder to remain logical in those moments. Okay. And another thing is when the amygdala is activated, our brain is not able to comprehend or know whether or not we are being triggered versus we are actively reliving that trauma again. So, meaning, like for example, if you're in a car accident, our brain is not able to tell, okay, they're in a car accident again and it's actively happening versus, okay, they're being triggered now and now they're thinking of all of that. Okay, something to keep in mind. And so, this is why old trauma responses such as freeze, fawn, lash out, or numbing will resurface again, even when we know better, even when we have coping mechanisms. Our bodies remember what our minds try to forget. And so, healing the spiral means teaching our nervous system safety through repeated, compassionate exposure and not perfect performance. Now, I want to talk about trauma in the body, okay? Because the thing is trauma does not store itself as a memory. We definitely can have memories of the traumatic experience. However, trauma stores itself within our bodies, and it is stored as a survival response in our body. Our bodies hold on to sensations, reflexes, and threat responses even when our conscious mind feels like we have moved on. This is why trauma healing or trauma work includes things such as somatic therapy, breath work, reparenting, and movement. Because our body has to feel safe again, not just think that it's safe. I also want to take some time to just kind of throw out there, if you are someone that feels like you explain your trauma away or you are able to intellectualize your emotions or intellectualize your traumatic experiences, I definitely would encourage you to take a look into some of these things that I talked about, because again, like I mentioned, for a lot of us, we are able to intellectualize our feelings. We are able to explain our traumas or our trauma responses. However, the thing is we cannot keep it just in the brain. We have to bring it down into our bodies in order to allow our body and our nervous system to work through and heal from it. Okay. I want to shift us into talking about and doing a quick overview of a modality and theory that I have used within my own practice and within my own life. I want to go over polyvagal theory with you folks. So within our brain, we have a thing called the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve runs from our brain down through our heart, lungs, and our gut. Okay. And it's a central part to our emotional regulation. Polyvagal theory was introduced to us from Dr. Stephen Porges, and the theory basically states that we operate from three main states. First one being ventral vagal or safety. So this is where we feel regulated, connected, and calm. The second state is sympathetic or fight or flight state. This is where we can feel anxious, restless, and irritable. And the final state is called dorsal vagal or our freeze state. This is where we tend to shut down, or we tend to numb, or feel extremely emotionally exhausted. Healing means being able to move between each state with awareness and compassion and not judgment. Okay? And I just want to throw out there, you cannot logic your way into healing. Like I just touched on, we cannot explain or reason away our traumas or reason away our healing process. No, we have to learn how to regulate our traumas. We have to learn how to regulate our emotions. Okay? Like I mentioned, if you are someone that intellectualizes your feelings, we have to learn how to bring it down into our body so that we can feel it. Because when we begin to feel our emotions, when we begin to feel all of the things that have happened to us, that is when we begin to really open up the room for healing. One of the main reasons why I truly enjoy polyvagal theory is because it helps us to explain why we revisit some of our old wounds. And some of those reasons are our body is still trying to protect us. You know, we might be or we might live in that sympathetic phase, meaning we're constantly in fight or flight. So our body is not able to recognize that we are safe. And so because of that, our body is still trying to protect us. Another reason is our vagus nerve is still trying to scan for threats, still trying to see if do we need to be on guard? Is it okay to be connected and to feel regulated? And lastly, our nervous system needs repetition and not shame. Okay? Meaning, again, when we find ourselves in this spiral or when we find ourselves, revisiting old wounds, instead of shaming ourselves for, still being upset about it, give yourself acknowledgement, give yourself compassion, and tell yourself, like, no, I'm not revisiting the same thing. Or, well, actually, we are revisiting the same wound, but this time, again, we have more clarity, we have more awareness, we have more self-compassion. And that is healing. Spiral that you're finding yourself in, sis, it's your body learning safety through consistency and not perfection. Now I want to go over, when you begin to feel like, ugh, why am I here again? And I just want to take some time to validate that because that is so real, especially when we feel like, okay, I thought I was past this, or, a lot of time has passed. Why am I still getting upset over this? Here's what's actually happening, okay? You have built enough safety to finally feel what you once avoided. You're more regulated, so now grief and awareness are beginning to surface more often. And I just want to throw out there that when these things are happening, that does not mean that you're regressing. Again, it just means that your body is finally feeling safe enough to feel things that we have maybe avoided for a very long time. I want you to ask yourself, am I less reactive? Do I recover fast from when I'm feeling triggered? Do I speak my needs more clearly? Am I setting boundaries instead of shrinking myself? These are signs that you are not the same version of yourself as before and that you are growing within the spiral. Okay? I know that healing can feel very lonely and feel very hard, especially when we are not seeing the progress, especially when there's not physical results that we can always see. And so, whenever you find yourself in that loop, stop and ask yourself these questions. Okay? Because when we start to check in with ourselves, when we start to build awareness around how we're showing up, like I always say, it becomes easier for us to, one, recognize change and recognize how far we have actually come. One of my favorite things to teach clients about is neural pathways and how we can rewire our brain after experiencing traumatic things. And so our brains run on neural pathways. And neural pathways are these repetitive loops that have been built by thoughts, habits, and reactions over time. And so the easiest way that I can give an example of neural pathways is in regarding addiction or in regards to addiction. For those of you who don't know, I was working with a lot of folks who were struggling with substance use issues. And it was during my time or it was during this time where I learned about neural pathways. And so essentially, whenever I would have clients and they would relapse, whether it be after 10 days, 30 days, 60 days, a lot of them would come back to me and they would feel so much guilt and shame. They would beat themselves up, and say things like, Keholani, like, I don't know why I did that, like I knew better, or I knew better, and I have all these coping mechanisms, but I don't know why I automatically went back to the drinking or to the drugs. And so the way that I like to teach people about neural pathways is, if you have been using a certain tool or a certain way to handle things, especially your trauma, for example, addiction being one of them, if that has always been your go-to, I'm sorry, it is kind of a crock of shit to think that just because now you've been sober, or you have been doing things one way for 10 days or X amount of time, that you know it's going to automatically change. No. Neural pathways take time to change. And so, like I said, I like to talk about neural pathways in regards to addiction, because it shows people and it allows people to give themselves grace. The habitual pathway, the pathway that we are typically used to, that one typically says, this is how I've always coped. The reactive pathway says, I'm unsafe, so I need to act now. And the creative pathway says, I can choose a new response. Every time that you pause, breathe, journal, or self-regulate, you are creating a new neural pathway. So, for example, if you are someone that, when you feel emotionally activated or emotionally triggered, you like to shut down. Basically, instead of shutting down, if you are choosing to engage, or if you are choosing to regulate, or even just breathe, that is signaling to your brain, like, okay, we're going to begin to try something else rather than shutting down. And over time, it becomes easier for you to want to go to that other neural pathway, or it becomes easier for you to want to, do the other thing versus what we're typically used to, which is shutting down. I want to talk about the importance of compassion over shame when it comes to our healing journey. Because shame says, you should be over this by now. But on the flip side, compassion tells us, you're still healing and you're doing it beautifully. Shame activates survival responses, meaning when we begin to shame ourselves, we begin to find ourselves in thought patterns, in behaviors that, again, are activating survival responses. However, on the contrary, compassion activates the prefrontal cortex and it brings us back to the present. And I also want to throw out there that our healing accelerates and continues when we stop punishing ourselves for being in the process of healing, especially when we're having our low or ugly moments. Because healing is not meant to be pretty. Not. It's meant to be life-changing. As always, I want to leave you folks with some affirmations that you guys can, repeat back to yourselves. Even when I return to old wounds, I return with more wisdom. I am safe inside of my spiral. I am not behind, but rather, I am in my rhythm with my nervous system. And healing is not a destination, but rather a relationship. As far as for book recommendation this week, if you're ready to understand why healing your spiral includes our ancestors, our body, and our community, My Grandmother's Hands is a must read. It's a very powerful body-centered book on healing racialized trauma through the lens of the nervous system and ancestral memory. I am going to butcher this name, but the book was written by Resmaa Menakem. I honestly just finished this book last year, the ending of last year, and I think it was an amazing read. So if you're open to it, sis, go ahead and purchase it. I love it because it validates why trauma is stored within the body. It centers nervous system regulation and talks about somatic healing. It speaks directly to generational pain and cultural silence. And it explains how real healing happens through our bodies and not just the mind. As we close out, sis, I just want to remind you that you are not failing at healing. You're moving through it again and again, like ocean waves and like the moon cycles. Healing comes in seasons, in spirals, and in sacred returns. And so I want you to honor where you are, because softness is not weakness, repetition is not regression, and you are rising, whether you see it or not. If this episode spoke to you, please share it. Send it to someone who's been hard on themselves. Tag at Soulful Wahine, post your favorite takeaway, and leave me some comments. Let's normalize soft healing and nervous system wisdom in our community. Because when we heal together, the spiral becomes less lonely. And as always, mahalo and aloha for tuning in.